42-year-old Derek Manning walked into the arraignment hearing with the casual confidence of a man who believed he had done nothing wrong. His suit was pressed, his posture relaxed, and as he took his seat in the courtroom, a faint smile played at the corners of his mouth. Not the nervous smile of someone facing serious charges, but the satisfied smirk of someone convinced that justice would vindicate him. He had been charged with second-degree murder in the death of 29-year-old motorcyclist Ryan Fitzgerald. But in Derek's mind, this was all a formality, a legal procedure that would ultimately confirm what he already knew to be true. He had acted in self-defense. He had protected himself from an aggressive biker who had threatened him on the highway. The system would see that. They had to, as he sat there, occasionally glancing around the courtroom with that same slight smile. He appeared utterly unconcerned about the proceedings, utterly confident in his narrative, and utterly oblivious to the mountain of evidence that was about to bury him. What Derek Manning didn't know, what his arrogance and self-righteousness had blinded him to, was that his entire crime had been captured on multiple dash cams and traffic cameras, and that the self-defense story he had constructed in his mind was about to be exposed as the calculated lie of a man who had hunted down and murdered another human being in broad daylight. The incident that would end one life and destroy another occurred on Interstate 405 in Orange County, California, on a sunny Tuesday afternoon in September. Traffic was moderate, the kind of stop-and-go flow that characterized Southern California freeways during mid-afternoon. Derek Manning was driving his gray Ford F-250 pickup truck, heading home from a job site where he worked as a construction supervisor. He was a man with a quick temper and an inflated sense of entitlement. Someone who viewed any perceived slight on the road as a personal attack that demanded retaliation. His driving record reflected this temperament. 3 citations for aggressive driving in the past 5 years. 2 incidents of road rage that had resulted in police reports but no charges. And a pattern of behavior that friends and coworkers quietly acknowledged but rarely confronted. On this particular day, Derek was already in a foul mood. His job site had experienced delays. A subcontractor had questioned his decisions, and he was running late for a meeting. The stage was set for violence, and all it would take was a spark. That spark came in the form of Ryan Fitzgerald, 29-year-old software developer who rode a blue Yamaha motorcycle as his primary mode of transportation. Ryan was engaged to be married, passionate about technology and environmental causes, and known among his friends and family as someone who went out of his way to avoid conflict. He was a careful rider, always wearing full protective gear, always checking his blind spots, always aware of the vulnerability that came with riding a motorcycle in heavy traffic. On September 19th, Ryan was heading home from work, looking forward to dinner with his fiancée, Sarah, and completely unaware that he had less than 20 minutes to live. The incident began when Ryan, following the legal practice of lane splitting that is permitted in California, carefully navigated between lanes of slow-moving traffic. As he passed Derek's truck on the left side, his mirror came within inches of Derek's side mirror, close but not making contact. A completely normal and legal maneuver that happens thousands of times per day on California highways. But Derek saw it differently. In his mind, this motorcyclist had cut him off, had shown him disrespect, had dared to move ahead of him in traffic. Derek's face flushed with anger. His hands tightened on the steering wheel and something dark and primitive took control. He laid on his horn, a long, aggressive blast that caused other drivers to look over in confusion. Ryan, hearing the horn, glanced back briefly, his body language suggesting confusion rather than aggression, and then continued forward, trying to put distance between himself and the angry truck driver. But Derek wasn't going to let it go. In his twisted logic, Ryan's attempt to move away was an act of cowardice, a refusal to face him, and it only fueled his rage. Derek made a decision in that moment that would destroy 2 families and reveal him as something far more dangerous than a man with a temper. He decided to chase Ryan down. What followed was a 3-mile pursuit that multiple witnesses would later describe as terrifying and deliberate. Derek accelerated his heavy pickup truck, weaving aggressively through traffic, cutting off other vehicles, running onto the shoulder when necessary, always keeping Ryan's blue motorcycle in his sights. Ryan, realizing he was being chased, tried to escape by speeding up, moving between lanes, attempting to use his motorcycle's maneuverability to his advantage. Witnesses in surrounding vehicles watched in horror as the chase unfolded, several of them calling 911 to report an aggressive driver in a gray Ford pickup truck who appeared to be hunting a motorcyclist. One caller said, "He's chasing him like he's trying to kill him." The 911 recording would later be played in court, the caller's panic evident in every word. Ryan tried everything to escape. He exited the freeway, but Derek followed. He turned onto surface streets, but Derek stayed right behind him. He ran a red light in a desperate attempt to lose his pursuer, but Derek ran it too, nearly causing a multi-car accident in the process. The chase finally ended on a 2-lane road called Chapman Avenue, a stretch of asphalt that would become Ryan Fitzgerald's final resting place. Ryan, perhaps believing he could reason with his pursuer, or perhaps simply exhausted from the chase and realizing he couldn't escape, began to slow down and pulled toward the shoulder. It was a fatal decision born of either hope or resignation. Derek, seeing Ryan slow down, didn't slow down himself. Instead, witnesses would later testify he actually accelerated. His massive pickup truck, weighing over 6,000 pounds, bore down on the motorcycle at over 50 miles per hour. Ryan, at the last second, seemed to realize what was about to happen. He tried to accelerate to get out of the way, but it was too late. Derek's truck struck the rear of Ryan's motorcycle with devastating force, launching both rider and bike into the air. Ryan was thrown nearly 40 feet, his body tumbling through the air before striking the pavement with a sickening impact. His helmet, which might have saved his life in a normal accident, cracked in multiple places from the severity of the collision. He died instantly, his neck broken, his internal injuries catastrophic. Derek's truck skidded to a stop about 50 yards past the impact site. For a moment he sat in his cab, his hands still on the wheel, breathing heavily. Then he put the truck in park, turned off the engine, and stepped out. Multiple witnesses who had stopped to help watched as Derek walked back toward the scene. Not running, not panicking, but walking with a deliberate, almost casual pace. He looked down at Ryan's broken body lying on the road, at the destroyed motorcycle, at the gathering crowd of horrified witnesses, and his face registered not horror or remorse, but something that several witnesses would later describe as satisfaction. He pulled out his cell phone and called 911 himself, and when the dispatcher answered, his voice was calm, almost annoyed. "Yeah, I need to report an accident," he said. "A motorcyclist attacked my vehicle, and I had to defend myself. He's down. You should probably send an ambulance, but I don't think he's moving." The first police officers arrived on scene within 4 minutes, expecting to find a tragic accident. Instead, they found a crime scene. Witnesses were already surrounding Derek, several of them pointing at him and shouting that he had chased the motorcyclist, that he had deliberately hit him, that this was murder. Derek stood calmly by his truck, his arms crossed, and when officers approached him, he immediately launched into his narrative. "I was driving and this crazy biker came up beside me, hit my mirror and started threatening me," he said, his voice steady and rehearsed. "He was following me, trying to run me off the road. I was in fear for my life. I had to defend myself. I had no choice." It was a well-constructed lie, delivered with the confidence of someone who had already convinced himself it was true. But Officer James Rodriguez, one of the first responders, had been on the force for 15 years, and he knew when he was being lied to. The body language didn't match the story. Derek was too calm, too collected, too eager to explain. And more importantly, multiple witnesses were telling a very different story. Officer Rodriguez separated Derek from the witnesses and began to gather statements. One by one, drivers who had witnessed the chase described the same thing. A large gray pickup truck aggressively pursuing a motorcycle for miles. The motorcyclist clearly trying to escape. The truck driver deliberately striking the bike from behind. One witness, a delivery driver with a dash cam in his vehicle, informed officers that he had captured at least part of the incident on video. Rodriguez immediately secured the dashcam SD card as evidence and called for detectives from the Major Crimes Unit. Derek, still believing his story would hold, consented to a recorded interview at the scene, waiving his Miranda rights with the confidence of someone who thought the truth was on his side. In that interview, conducted while Ryan Fitzgerald's body still lay covered on the pavement 30 yards away, Derek repeated his self-defense claim, elaborating with details that he clearly believed made his story more credible. He claimed Ryan had brake-checked him multiple times, had made threatening gestures, had tried to force him off the road. It was all fiction, and it was all being recorded. Ryan's fiancée, Sarah Chen, received the call that would destroy her life at 4:47 p.m. She was at work, editing a presentation, thinking about what to cook for dinner, completely unprepared for the detective's voice on the other end of the line, informing her that Ryan had been killed in a traffic collision. The words didn't make sense at first. Ryan was careful. Ryan was safe. Ryan always wore his gear, always followed the rules. There had to be a mistake. But as the detective gently but firmly explained that Ryan had been struck by a vehicle and died at the scene, Sarah's world fractured into before and after. The before, where she and Ryan were planning a wedding, talking about children, building a future together, and the after, a vast, dark emptiness where Ryan no longer existed. She collapsed in her office, her co-workers rushing to help her, her screams of grief echoing through the building. By the time she arrived at the police station hours later, her face swollen from crying, her body shaking with shock, detectives had already begun piecing together the evidence that would prove Ryan's death was not an accident, but a murder. The investigation moved quickly, driven by the overwhelming physical and video evidence. The Orange County Sheriff's Department assigned Detective Lisa Moreno to lead the case, and she approached it with the thoroughness of someone who understood that this was not just about justice for one victim, but about removing a dangerous individual from the streets. Moreno obtained traffic camera footage from Caltrans, which showed Derek's truck pursuing Ryan's motorcycle across multiple camera angles. She collected dashcam footage from 3 different vehicles, each showing portions of the chase and the final fatal impact. She interviewed 17 witnesses, and their testimonies were remarkably consistent. Derek had chased Ryan deliberately, aggressively, and intentionally. The physical evidence from the collision told the same story. The angle of impact, the pattern of debris. The final positions of the vehicles all indicated that Derek had accelerated into Ryan from behind. Not that Ryan had attacked Derek's vehicle in any way. Forensic analysts examined both vehicles and found no damage to the front of Ryan's motorcycle or the side of Derek's truck that would be consistent with Derek's claim that Ryan had struck his mirror or attacked his vehicle. But the most damning evidence came from the dashcam footage, which Moreno watched dozens of times, each viewing making her more disgusted and more determined. The video showed the entire chase from start to finish, Ryan's legal lane split that had triggered Derek's rage, Derek's aggressive pursuit weaving through traffic, Ryan's desperate attempts to escape, and the final, horrific moment when Derek's truck deliberately accelerated into Ryan's motorcycle from behind, launching him to his death. The video also captured something else, something that would become a focal point of the trial: Derek's face. In several of the traffic camera angles, Derek's face was visible through his windshield during the chase, and his expression was not one of fear or self-defense. It was rage, pure and unfiltered. In the moments before impact, a high-resolution traffic camera captured Derek's face clearly, and the image showed not a man afraid for his life, but a man who had made a calculated decision to end another person's life. Detective Moreno submitted her report to the Orange County District Attorney's Office with a recommendation for second-degree murder charges. Derek Manning had not acted in self-defense. He had committed vehicular homicide with implied malice. He had known his actions would likely result in death, and he had done it anyway. Derek was arrested at his home 2 days after the incident, the delay giving detectives time to compile their evidence before charging him. He was genuinely shocked by the murder charge, having convinced himself that his self-defense narrative would be accepted without question. His bail was set at $2 million, which he was unable to post, and he remained in custody awaiting trial. His arraignment was a brief procedural hearing, but it was there that Derek first revealed the arrogance that would characterize his courtroom behavior. When the charges were read, second-degree murder with special allegations of using a vehicle as a deadly weapon, Derek actually smiled and shook his head, as if the charges were absurd. When asked how he pleaded, he said not guilty. with a tone that suggested the justice system had made a foolish mistake that would soon be corrected. As he was led out of the courtroom, he glanced at the gallery where Sarah Chen sat surrounded by Ryan's family, and his expression showed not remorse or empathy, but annoyance that he was being inconvenienced by their grief. The case was assigned to Senior Deputy District Attorney Michael Torres, a veteran prosecutor known for his meticulous trial preparation and his ability to connect with juries on emotional cases. Torres reviewed the evidence and knew he had a strong case from a legal standpoint. The video evidence alone was nearly insurmountable. But he also knew that defense attorneys could be effective at creating doubt, at humanizing defendants, at making juries hesitate before convicting someone of murder when the weapon was a vehicle rather than a gun or knife. Torres's strategy would be to present the dashcam footage early and often, to let Derek's own actions and the cold, hard evidence speak louder than any narrative the defense could construct. He would show the jury that this was not an accident, not a momentary loss of control, but a deliberate 3-mile hunt that ended with the intentional killing of a young man whose only crime was existing in Derek's space. Derek's attorney was Marcus Whitfield, a capable defense lawyer who took one look at the evidence and immediately began trying to negotiate a plea deal. He knew the video evidence was devastating, that Derek's self-defense claim was unsupportable, and that going to trial was a massive risk. Whitfield proposed manslaughter charges with a plea of no contest, arguing that while Derek had acted recklessly and caused Ryan's death, there was no premeditation and no intent to kill, just a moment of road rage that spiraled out of control. It was a reasonable legal argument, but Torres rejected it outright. The evidence showed deliberation, 3 miles of pursuit, multiple opportunities to stop, a final acceleration into impact. This was murder, and Torres intended to prove it. Whitfield reluctantly prepared for trial, knowing his client's personality, and the video evidence would make his job nearly impossible. His meetings with Derek were frustrating exercises in denial. Derek remained convinced that any jury would see things his way, that his version of events was credible, and that the video evidence somehow didn't show what everyone else clearly saw. Whitfield tried to explain the concept of implied malice, tried to make Derek understand the severity of his situation. But Derek dismissed his concerns with the same arrogance he brought to every aspect of the case. The trial began on a gray February morning. The courtroom packed with Ryan's family and friends, members of the local motorcycle community wearing patches and leather in solidarity, and media covering a case that had captured public attention. Derek entered wearing a suit that Whitfield had selected, but his demeanor undermined any attempt at presenting him sympathetically. He walked with his chest out, his chin up, scanning the courtroom with a look that suggested he was the wronged party, that everyone else was simply too naive to see the truth of his self-defense claim. He took his seat at the defense table and immediately began whispering to Whitfield, gesturing confidently, apparently explaining how they should proceed, as if he knew more about trial strategy than his experienced attorney. Judge Catherine Brennan, a stern jurist known for maintaining strict control over her courtroom, watched him with narrowed eyes, already forming an assessment of his character. Prosecutor Torres's opening statement was a masterclass in narrative construction. He began not with the chase or the killing, but with Ryan's life. He showed the jury photos of Ryan as a child, as a college graduate, as a young man in love with Sarah Chen. He described Ryan's passion for his work, his love of motorcycles, his careful attention to safety, his plans for the future. He painted a picture of a full, vibrant life, making Ryan real to the jury, transforming him from an abstract victim into a human being they could connect with. Then Torres shifted, his tone darkening, and described the events of September 19th. He promised the jury they would see dashcam footage and traffic camera footage that showed, beyond any shadow of doubt, that Derek Manning had chased Ryan Fitzgerald for 3 miles and then deliberately struck him with his truck, killing him instantly. "This is not a case about an accident," Torres said, his voice firm. "This is not a case about self-defense. This is a case about a man whose ego and anger were so out of control that he decided another human being deserved to die for the perceived slight of passing him on the highway. And you will see, with your own eyes, the moment he made that decision and carried it out." Marcus Whitfield's opening statement was a difficult balancing act. He couldn't deny the basic facts, they were on video, but he tried to frame Derek's actions as a momentary lapse in judgment driven by fear and adrenaline, not malice. He argued that Derek had felt threatened by Ryan's riding behavior, that the chase was Derek trying to get away from Ryan, a claim that would later be thoroughly dismantled by the video evidence, and that the collision was a tragic accident born from panic, not intent. He asked the jury to consider that Derek had no criminal history of violence, that he had called 911 himself, and that while his actions had led to a death, that didn't make him a murderer. It was the best argument Whitfield could construct given the evidence, but it was built on a foundation of sand, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. Throughout both opening statements, Derek sat with a faint, knowing smile, occasionally shaking his head at the prosecutor's characterization of events, his body language communicating not remorse or humility, but disagreement and confidence that the jury would ultimately side with him. The prosecution's case began with testimony from witnesses who had observed the chase. One by one, they took the stand and described the terrifying pursuit they had witnessed. Jennifer Walsh, a mother of 3 who had been driving with her children in the car, testified that she had watched Derek's truck chase the motorcycle aggressively, cutting off multiple vehicles, and that she had called 911 because she was certain the truck driver was trying to hurt the motorcyclist. "My kids were scared," she said, her voice shaking with the memory. "They kept asking me why that truck was trying to hit the motorcycle. I didn't have an answer for them." Other witnesses testified to the same effect. The pursuit was deliberate, aggressive, and clearly motivated by anger rather than fear. Throughout this testimony, Derek sat with a dismissive expression, occasionally rolling his eyes or whispering comments to Whitfield, showing no emotional response to the descriptions of his dangerous driving or its consequences. Then came Sarah Chen's victim impact testimony, delivered during the trial's evidentiary phase with the judge's permission due to its relevance to Derek's state of mind and actions. Sarah walked to the witness stand with visible effort, her grief still raw months after Ryan's death. She wore a simple black dress and clutched a photo of Ryan in her hands. Torres gently guided her through testimony about Ryan's life, their relationship, their plans for the future, and the devastating impact his death had on her and their families. She described receiving the call that Ryan was dead, the surreal horror of identifying his body, the emptiness of the apartment they had shared that now felt like a tomb. Her voice broke multiple times, and several jurors openly cried listening to her. The courtroom was completely silent except for Sarah's testimony and the quiet sounds of grief from Ryan's family in the gallery. And during this heartbreaking testimony, as Sarah Chen described the man she loved and the future that had been stolen from them, Derek Manning yawned. It wasn't a subtle, hidden yawn. It was an open, exaggerated yawn, the kind of gesture that communicated boredom and dismissiveness. Several jurors saw it, their faces immediately registering shock and disgust. Judge Brennan saw it, her jaw tightening as she made a note on her pad. Sarah saw it, her testimony faltering as she registered the defendant's complete lack of empathy or remorse. For a moment, the courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting to see if Derek had really just done what they thought he had done. Whitfield grabbed Derek's arm and whispered urgently in his ear, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. But the damage was done. The jury had just witnessed in real time the complete absence of conscience that had allowed Derek Manning to chase down and kill another human being. His yawn was more damning than any words could be. It revealed him not as a man who had acted in self-defense, but as someone utterly devoid of empathy or remorse. The turning point of the trial came when Torres called his key witness, himself, in the form of video presentation. "The people called digital evidence exhibits 15 through 31, Torres announced. The courtroom lights were dimmed, and a large screen was positioned where the jury, judge, and gallery could all see clearly. What followed was the most devastating 45 minutes of the trial. Torres methodically presented dashcam and traffic camera footage that showed the entire incident from multiple angles. The jury watched as Ryan legally lane split past Derek's truck, watched as Derek immediately began his pursuit, watched the 3-mile chase unfold in real time across multiple camera angles. They saw Derek weave through traffic, run red lights, cut off other vehicles, always keeping Ryan in his sights. They watched Ryan's desperate attempts to escape, his motorcycle darting between cars, taking an exit, trying everything to get away from his pursuer. But the most powerful footage came from a Caltrans traffic camera positioned at an intersection on Chapman Avenue. The high-resolution camera captured the final moments of Ryan's life in brutal clarity. The footage showed Ryan slowing down, perhaps in resignation or perhaps hoping to reason with Derek. It showed Derek's truck approaching from behind, and in the seconds before impact, the camera captured Derek's face through his windshield. The image was crystal clear, enlarged and played in slow motion for the jury. Derek's expression was not fear. It was not panic. It was cold, calculated rage, and in the moment before he struck Ryan, his face showed determination and intent. He pressed the accelerator deliberately. His truck surged forward, and the impact launched Ryan and his motorcycle into the air. The dashcam footage from a trailing vehicle captured the moment from behind, showing the trajectory of Ryan's body as he was thrown 40 feet. The sickening impact when he hit the ground. The way his body went still immediately. The courtroom was silent except for the sounds of crying from Ryan's family and several jurors. The video was impossible to misinterpret, impossible to explain away. This was not self-defense. This was not an accident. This was a deliberate act of violence, a man using his vehicle as a weapon to end another person's life. Torres let the final image freeze on screen. Ryan's motorcycle destroyed, his body lying on the pavement. Derek's truck stopped in the distance. "Ladies and gentlemen," Torres said quietly, "the defendant wants you to believe he was afraid for his life. But does that look like fear on his face? Does chasing someone for 3 miles look like self-defense? Does accelerating into someone from behind look like an accident?" He paused, letting the questions hang in the air. "No, that is what murder looks like." For the first time in the entire trial, Derek's confident expression cracked. He stared at the frozen image on the screen, seeing his own face enlarged, seeing what the jury was seeing, and something that might have been recognition or fear flickered in his eyes. His smile disappeared. His hands, which had been casually folded on the table, now gripped the edge. He whispered urgently to Whitfield, his demeanor shifting from confident to concerned. Whitfield's expression was grim. He knew the case was lost, that the video had done exactly what Torres intended, showing the jury not Derek's version of events, but objective reality that could not be disputed or explained away. The defense's entire strategy, built on creating reasonable doubt about Derek's state of mind, had just been demolished by Derek's own face, captured in high definition, showing clear intent in the moments before he killed Ryan Fitzgerald. The defense's case was brief and unconvincing. Whitfield called a use-of-force expert who testified about the stress responses in road rage situations, trying to argue that Derek may have experienced a fear response that impaired his judgment. But on cross-examination, Torres got the expert to admit that the video showed no evidence of fear response, that Derek's deliberate 3-mile pursuit was inconsistent with someone trying to escape, and that accelerating into someone from behind was not a defensive action by any definition. Whitfield called Derek's co-workers who testified that he was a good guy and a hard worker, but their character testimony felt hollow in the face of the video evidence and Derek's courtroom behavior. Whitfield wisely did not put Derek on the stand. His personality and his inability to show remorse would have been catastrophic for his defense. The closing arguments crystallized the case. Torres reminded the jury of everything they had seen: the witnesses, the chase, the video evidence, Derek's face before impact, and his behavior in court, including the yawn during Sarah's testimony. "The defendant showed you who he is," Torres said. "He showed you in that video and he showed you in this courtroom. He is a man who believes his anger is more important than another person's life. He is a man who showed no remorse then and shows no remorse now. Ryan Fitzgerald is dead because Derek Manning decided his ego was worth more than Ryan's life. That is murder, and you must hold him accountable." Whitfield's closing was a plea for mercy and a lesser verdict, arguing that while Derek's actions were wrong, they didn't rise to the level of murder. But his argument felt desperate and unconvincing in the face of what the jury had witnessed. The jury deliberated for 6 hours over 2 days. When they returned, their faces were somber and resolved. The foreman stood and delivered the verdict that everyone in the courtroom expected, but that Derek Manning had convinced himself would never come. Guilty of second-degree murder. Guilty of using a vehicle as a deadly weapon. Derek's face went white. His mouth opened as if to object, but no sound came out. The confidence, the arrogance, the smile, it all evaporated in an instant, replaced by the stunned expression of a man who had finally, devastatingly, realized that reality didn't care about his narrative. As the verdict was read, Sarah Chen collapsed into the arms of Ryan's mother, both women sobbing with relief and continued grief. The guilty verdict didn't bring Ryan back, but it acknowledged that his life mattered, that his death was not an accident, and that the man who killed him would face consequences. The sentencing hearing 3 weeks later was Sarah Chen's opportunity to address Derek directly. She stood at the podium, her voice stronger now than it had been during the trial, fortified by rage and the need to be heard. She looked directly at Derek, who for once couldn't meet her eyes, and spoke not just to him, but about him. "You killed the man I loved because he had the audacity to exist in your space," she said. "You chased him for 3 miles. You had dozens of opportunities to stop, to let it go, to remember that we're all human beings just trying to get home safely. But your ego wouldn't let you. And then when I testified about the man you murdered, you yawned. You showed us exactly what kind of person you are. Someone who values their own anger more than someone else's entire life. I hope you spend every day of your sentence thinking about what you took from Ryan, from me, from his family. I hope you finally develop the capacity for remorse that you've lacked this entire time." Judge Brennan's sentencing statement was equally powerful. She addressed Derek directly, her voice cold with controlled fury. "Mr. Manning, I have presided over many trials in my career, and I have rarely seen a defendant display the level of arrogance and lack of remorse that you have shown. You committed a brutal act of violence, and then you sat in my courtroom with a smile on your face, yawning during victim testimony, behaving as if this trial was an inconvenience rather than a reckoning for taking a human life. Your behavior has shown me, and this community, that you are a danger to public safety, and that you lack the basic human empathy necessary to function in society." She sentenced him to 15 years to life in state prison, with parole eligibility only after serving the full 15 years. It was a substantial sentence, one that acknowledged the severity of the crime and the danger Derek posed. As the bailiffs moved in to take Derek away, his composure completely shattered. The man who had smiled through his arraignment, who had yawned during testimony about the life he had taken, now broke down entirely. He began to cry, then to sob, his body shaking with the kind of deep, desperate crying that comes when reality finally, irrevocably, crashes through delusion. "I didn't mean to," he choked out, though no one was listening. "I didn't mean to." But of course he had meant to. The video showed it. His face in those final seconds before impact showed it. His 3-mile pursuit showed it. And now, 15 years too late, as he was led from the courtroom in chains to begin a sentence that would consume the rest of his productive life, Derek Manning finally understood what everyone else had known from the beginning. He was not a victim defending himself. He was a killer who had let his ego and anger turn him into a murderer. The road rage killer who had smiled his way through his trial would spend the next decade and a half learning that the justice system doesn't smile back.